Name's Chris Bladdies, Billings, Montana. You got Mike Hutchinson on running the camera. We're Montana Glass and Shower Door, and today I'm gonna go over and show you how we cut down curved laminated glass. I've done a few YouTube videos before, and this will be another one that we can do. And again, my efforts are to try to entice or teach other people. You know, so that we're not sending me all the stuff. That there's other guys around the country that can do it, but I think they're afraid to try it a lot of times because the success rate for most people is pretty nil. I figured out ways of doing it just from doing it so much that there are ways that you can do it and alleviate or mitigate that chance of breaking the glass where you're not wanting to break it. So, and I'm just going to show you real close how I do it today and cut down. What we have here is there are a couple of quarter windows for a 52, I think, Chevy pickup. They're from Sterling Hot Rods over in Virginia. My friend Britt over there sent out a couple of patterns. They chopped the top on a Chevy pickup, and these are the little quarter windows. Everything else is flat and pretty easy and self-explanatory, but they got to get these side windows cut down. And I'll tell you that most of the time, well, all of the time, the factory ones came tempered, and you can't cut down tempered glass on these particular kind. Well, on any kind, you can't cut tempered glass. Once it's been tempered, it's in its state, and if it breaks at all, it's going to break in a million little pieces. So you have to get laminated glass, and we actually there's a company called Sanders Reproduction Glass over, I think they're in Vancouver, and they stock a lot of laminated curved parts. So a lot of times you can find, say, a back window for a 52 Chevy car, you know, big old curved piece of glass. And they come from the factory with tempered glass, but they actually stock laminated ones over there. So if you wind up having to chop one down or something like that, you can do that. Same with the windshields. They got, you know, tons of different, they got most of the windshields I ever call them for. So anyway, we can talk about that later. But Britt sent me these patterns, and basically there's a couple of different ways to make the patterns, and this material works real good. It's like a thinner cardboard, especially on them curved parts, and this has only got one curve. It's not a compound curve where it curves this way too. So fairly easy to build a pattern of that. I will say that it does make a difference when you make the pattern, the position that the pattern is in relation to the inside and outside of the pinch weld, because as the thickness of the glass, basically, if you make your pattern of the outside of the piece, or on the outside of the channel where the glass goes, it'll be the outside of the curve of this glass. But if you make it to the inside of it, it's going to be smaller inside than it is outside. And so this one here, when I put the pattern up here, it's 1/8 of an inch short on both sides. So the pattern was made to go from the inside, and it just makes a difference for when you go to cut it. And so we lined that up, and basically all I did was held that there and took a black marker on the inside and drew what I needed to cut off of it, and just transferred that right over to that. And then we'll take our tools and cut that excess off, and then run it through the grinder and get the edges nice, and send them back to Virginia, and he'll be able to install them. So basically I don't honestly know the physics involved with how curving the glass works, but I know that there's heat involved, and when glass gets heated up and then bent, you know, or laid into something, and then it gets curved like this, and then as it cools off, it wants to straighten itself back out just a little bit, and so that stress in the glass is what causes the runs to break off of your score. That's what causes that. So I figured out ways in how I cut it to alleviate that stress fairly evenly, so that it's not pulling too hard and causing something to run. So I would take something like this, and it's got, you know, rounded corners on both sides, but it's got a fairly long straight stretch right here. So I'm just going to take and run my cutter right across that straight stretch for now and run a nice fairly straight line there. I might come at a little bit of an angle and curve it just a little bit because it is all the way rounded, but I'll stay right on that, and then I'll come back and I'll score the two ears on the side. And when I do that, if I was to try to run them all at once and do one score and break it that way, when you go to crack it, the way it pulls on it, 99 times out of 100, it's going to crack off on right here. And you can't control what direction that crack runs off of your score. It's just something that's in the glass. And once it starts down that path, it's hard to get it routed back up onto the original score. If it breaks off and runs out to the outside of the glass, that's no big deal because we're cutting that off anyway. So we just want to keep all of our scores, or all of our runs, don't let them happen in the part where we're trying to save. So, and when I use these oil filled cutters, I think it's a Toyo, and it's got the head depresses a little spring in there, and as you do that, it wicks oil down onto the roller, onto the thing that scores the glass. And you got to do it with an even pressure. You can't start and stop. You have to, you know, start on one edge and go all the way and keep that pressure even. And that's what's hard about this, is because you're going over an uneven surface. If it was just flat on the table, that's easy to keep the constant pressure, but it's a little bit harder when you're doing with the curves. So and I'm listening for that sound. And I can hear it biting down into the glass. You don't want to go too hard because then it makes a hot score and it makes things break kind of funny. So that touch of that is honestly the most important part. And I will say that I start by cutting the outside piece of glass first. So again, this is laminated glass, and there's 2 layers of glass and 1 layer of plastic in between them. So you actually wind up having to score things twice and break it twice, going over the exact same lines. So these are my run pliers, and they got a little drop jaw on them there that that's what you use for tapping the glass, and we're gonna break that now. It's scored. Now we're gonna try to follow that break with our tapping. And so I'm going to come in here on the side, and again I'm going to start off here over on this end. And I'm beating on that right underneath of the score. And see, it just runs. And see, that one ran out here a little bit, but I'm aiming for over here. And then I'll take my pliers and I'll wind up finishing off these corners just with my pliers. And I can control where that break is going. This one I'll start. You can watch that open up like that. A lot of times when you got 2 scores coming together, that very last bit is hard to get them to jump over to each other, but it's really important that you do get them to jump over to each other and connect, because, and you also have to make sure that that glass is broke clean on that whole side. The whole piece of glass is broke all the way through, and I'll explain why here. I still got a little tiny bit right there that I'm trying to get. It's not wanting to go. I'm not going to push it too hard. I'm going to go the other direction now and cut this inside piece. And then that'll alleviate some more of that stress that's in the glass. Once I get rid of all that, then it's pretty easy. So again, I'm going exactly over my other score on the other side, which is easy to see now because it's broke. The glass is broke. And again, it's going to be hard to do that and follow this curve all the way across and keep that pressure consistent. So I connected my scores, and now I come here. Now I gotta look at things real close and make sure they're all busted clean. And then we're gonna put fire to it and heat that up enough to warm that lamination in between the two pieces up enough to where we can spread it apart a little bit, enough to get a razor blade in there to finish cutting it. So, looks good. So we take Glassman special sauce, which is denatured alcohol, in our fancy container with a little hole popped in it. And we want to lay a decent layer of it in here, and then we'll light it on fire and use that heat to warm it up. You can dunk it in a thing of hot water or something and leave it there for a minute if you have that. That works good too. It's just more of a pain in the butt for me. But so. And you barely see the flame. Do that kind of a couple of times and it starts to warm it up. You don't want to get it too hot. And see now, I got a little bit of flex. It stretches that lamination out a little bit, and I can get a razor blade right in here. And just cut it. Same thing on these. And there you go. And then, like I said, we just run it through the grinder a little bit and clean off these tips and make a nice edge out of it again. And then we stick it in the box and send it back. So